So today I was thinking about talking about antifragility, right? And I don't know if you remember Nassim Nicholas Taleb, right? We've talked a lot about him, Black Swan events and everything like that. He wrote a book called Antifragile. And have you ever heard of the term antifragile, or what do you think?
Well,
That
I've
means?
heard you speak about it outside of this podcast a little, but not go into the full details of it.
Yeah, right. So basically antifragile, like the way he explains it is that it's like how systems are able to withstand shocks and stress and able to become stronger through shocks and stresses. So in short, basically it's a system or an entity, it can even be a person, that benefits from stress, volatility, or uncertainty, and it grows stronger as a result of that.
Okay, so it's like going through the sort of the tough times, whether it's your system, which exposes the weaknesses, so you can find the more strengths within that system, person, brain, whatever it is.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's
Yeah.
the context he wrote, like he explains it in.
Yes. Yeah. He
Okay.
uses a lot of examples as well, and he explains it with more in depth of like how the focus should be more of becoming an anti-fragile individual.
Yeah.
And I guess like we should make like a difference between what anti-fragile is. What do you mean by fragile and durability? So
So how would you define anti-fragility for you?
the best way I think about it is like a hydra. I think I use this example a lot of times, where it's like mythological creatures. You think of a hydra. When you cut off one of its heads, it grows two heads. So, and when you keep cutting off another head, it grows two heads. So it's like actually exponentially getting stronger through, you could say, death or through failure or through risk. So it's getting stronger and stronger over time. So that's like the best way to think of, I would say, anti-fragility. And then when you think about fragile, I think about, remember how I talked about Damocles' sword? How in like being in that position as King Dionysus II, although he's very powerful, he's also very fragile because it just takes a single thread of that sword to drop and he's basically dead. So that's like a good way to think about fragility, where it's like basically something that can be easily broken through stress. Think of glass, shatters, breaks very easily, very fragile. And then there's like durability. And I used to always mix up durability and anti-fragility. I mean, I didn't know what anti-fragility was at the time, but durability is basically resistance to damage. And the way to think about it is like a phoenix. Like a phoenix, when it goes through the process of death, it basically comes back in its original form. So it goes through the process of rebirth. So it doesn't necessarily improve from stress. It's the ability to bounce back very quickly from failure, how fast it can come back from failure, but in its original state. It didn't necessarily get stronger. So that's how you differentiate between like fragile, durability, and also anti-fragility.
That's a good call out because I think we're good to bounce back from things, but I think we don't self-reflect what we learned or what became better of us or the system. And you're right. I think when you go through a Black Swan event, the weaknesses that gets picked out in your systems or yourself or whatever it is, there is that moment to really self-reflect and think, what could I do better? How could I prepare for this? And I think that's why technology has evolved over time. And people actually get stronger as well as they go through the bad times. And unfortunately, that's how life works. You've got to go through the bad times to really enjoy the better times. But the bad times really bring out the weaknesses and what you thought you're not capable of, you are actually capable of. So it brings a new level of resiliency. But that's a pretty good definition. Why did he write this book? Was it in conjunction with the Black Swan?
Yeah, that would be more of a question for Nicholas.
For him,
yeah. Taleb. I wouldn't necessarily know, but I presume, I'm not sure I would say the dates of when these books were released.
Okay.
But I presume like he's always interested in the idea of like strengthening from stress and how we can benefit from like negative and like negativity, like especially Black Swan, as he said. He framed it in a very different way. And I think that's what a lot of his themes is with topics, like how you can benefit from stress, how you can benefit from negative experiences, and not to the point where it makes you fragile and like destroy you, but you can actually strengthen from that. He gives a more of like a optimistic, positive type of view towards like the more what the sort of conventional thinking would be, which is like more pessimistic and negative and cynical when we go through those types of events.
Yeah, interesting. What are some practical applications of anti-fragility?
I think you probably already know one, right? Which would be when you go to the gym. That's like the most easiest example which is so applicable for everyone. Like our bodies are technically anti-fragile. I mean, it depends on what we do with it, but when you go to the gym, you're actually tearing your muscles, right? That's like the process of how you're gaining strength. You're tearing your muscles, you're pushing against weight and resistance. And that's why the rest period is important, because then you're giving your body the ability to replenish the nutrients that you've had, to regrow those muscle fibers, to be able to push even heavier weight. That's why there's like the idea of hypertrophy and like progressive overload and things like that. So in a way, our bodies are pretty much anti-fragile. Even with like when we have cold or flu, like that immunity we build is in a way making our biological processes more anti-fragile.
I heard this on a podcast. It was quite interesting to hear. When people are anxious and then they go exercise and they feel better, they say that, I'm not going to say they say that. This is what I heard. This theory was that back in the day, like, when we're primates, etc., like as evolutions come, there was that same feeling of anxiousness around threats. So like being eaten by a predator or running away from a threat. And so the idea was that, and I'm probably completely butchering this, but it was as they ran away from that threat, because the threat went away over time, the anxious feeling that you feel also goes away. And so one of the not theories, but one of the things that I heard was that's why exercise is sort of built in our thing to help us through anxiety, because it takes us back to that time of evolution. I don't know how true that is, but thought I'd share that. But it kind of does make sense if you think about it, because when you're anxious or you're feeling a bit down, and then or there's a threat, you don't feel good, and then you go exercise, get the blood flowing, or you remove the threat. Essentially, you start feeling better. Like I've noticed that as well. So, I mean, not anything different from anti-fragility, but yeah, like I think our bodies are meant to be pushed to the limit. That's how we've evolved. We haven't evolved by sitting down all day in our chairs, whatever it is. We've evolved to be around, walking barefoot, whatever it is, and taking in nature, but pushing your body in different ways. So, yeah, that's actually a good one to think about, because I don't think people actually think about that a lot.
Yeah, it's very good how you brought that example as well, because sitting in the desk all day doing no exercise actually makes you more fragile. Just think about it, because it's like you're in a very stiff position, and now if you imagine like you're in the chair for 10 years straight, no exercise, and you have to play now sports with kids. You break your ankle. Now it's like you're so vulnerable to like those injuries, like knees, and like because your body is so stiff, it hasn't moved for a long time. And I feel like our bodies are so smart that it just adapts to the situation, and it makes these micro adjustments. Like if you're in a very stiff position, like all your posture and stuff will be like more stiff. You'll be sort of like rounding your back and everything, and everything else of your body adjusts to that type of motion, to that posture. And that creates vulnerabilities, because when you're in positions of sport, right, where you're in unpredictable circumstances, we have to catch the ball in a very weird angle. It's like, and then it exposes a muscle or like some sort of muscle or position you've never been in, and it makes then you have like injuries that way, and it's because you haven't gone through like the consistent stress and like sort of exercising as well, which makes you have injuries and things like that. So it's a good point you bring up that how doing that makes us more fragile, but also by putting ourselves in or transforming that energy into something that puts us in an environment of consistent stress, which is like exercise, will in a way prevent us from experiencing those black swan events.
And I think another good thing is our body adapts as well. Like your body will adapt to whatever situation or environment you put it in. So that's quite fascinating in itself, because like neurologically, and how your brain forms those habits or adapts to your body going through that stress is quite fascinating. It kind of tells you that's how the sort of survival of the fittest, right? That's how evolution has worked over time. It's who's willing to put up with the most stress and who's the most strongest in that point. So yeah. What are some other examples of it, of anti-fragility?
I think when you think about like economic systems like the GFC, the Great Depression, those types of situations, I mean, banks probably had to tighten a bit of the policies and stuff with how they give out, I would say, like how they give out like money and things like that, like credit ratings and all those types of things they've had to introduce and be more strict around that. So I guess, and also businesses, like we can talk about like the recent pandemic that happened. Businesses have now become more digital. So in a way, obviously the ones that couldn't survive had to probably, it just sort of exposed which ones are very vulnerable and fragile. They couldn't adapt. So they had to change their complete process and become more digital. And now they've got more reach, and it's like, even if a disaster does happen, even if it's like, they can still operate remotely. So in a way, that's made businesses more anti-fragile, the ones that have benefited from that or found ways of how to benefit from such a shock. So I feel like that's like an example of businesses or economy benefiting in a way from like these collapses. It's just adapting with tech, especially.
So it shows the vulnerabilities in the system, and then it's up to the system, i.e. the banks or the economic systems, to fix that and make it more better. So it's a better outcome for people. But also, yeah, the idea that digitalization is such a huge thing now. Everything's become digital, and you're right. COVID did expose that. I think people were reluctant to become fully digital. I mean, we were heading towards that way, but not the way we've progressed to digital now is a lot quicker than what we would have actually expected it to become fully immersed in.
Yeah. It's. I think it's like that event sort of like led to much more rapid growth, and I think even in the development of AI, especially as well.
Mm. And what are some other examples of it?
I think the one that Nassim talks about specifically, and this is a bit of a sensitive topic, but the way he talks about it is like post-traumatic growth. And what he's talking about is like thriving through like adversity and like basically like psychological, I would say like discomforts and things that you have, but going through the process of therapy. And then you sort of build your own more self-awareness. And I'm not talking about like, someone passing away or like war. Like those things are very sensitive and very different. I'm talking about like, it could be even like losing wealth. A lot of people go through those types of things where the fear of poverty, fear of criticism, for example. As a child, you've been bullied, things like that. And it's like you go through the process of sort of like therapy and understanding yourself. And that process, I think, allows you to then become more true, have a much more, I would say, better awareness of who you are, what you are, and just building that self, like the self-image and understanding the self. And that sort of makes you, I would say, anti-fragile as an individual. Because when you come across these events again, it doesn't affect you as much as it initially did, because you've gone through the process of reprogramming your mind, getting rid of self-limiting beliefs and things like that, and building a much more, I would say, truthful understanding of who you are and what you are.
A good example of that is Alex Hormozi. So I think he talks about it a lot with different podcasts that I've heard, and he talks about it how, he obviously smart person. I was going to say smart kid, a smart individual. Went through like the American education system, and so I might be butchering this story, so apologies, but I think he started his first gym. He lived in that gym, and that was his goal, like to become an entrepreneur in the fitness industry. And I think at some point the business partner came in. He made a lot of money, the business partner ran off with the money and it left him with nothing. So he was back to square one. And he said, I think, and please don't quote me on this, listen to the podcast he's on, because they're actually incredible and they're quite insightful from what you can learn. He said he made more money in that 1 year than he did in like 5 years. And that shows that is the perfect example of anti-fragility. Was he could either, and he built the skills, he knew how to make money. He knew the value of sales, he knew the value of networking, he knew the value of mental resiliency, he knew the value of business, he knew how to approach problems in a better way. So all those learnings in 5 years then compounded, and without him knowing it, he's been able to implement it. And now he's probably worth a lot more than he was at that point in time. So that shows you that along the way of you going through the process, you're learning a lot. And those weaknesses that you're identifying, you really need to self-reflect and understand, can I turn that weakness into a strength? Because you might not know it, but 5 years later, when you've lost everything, you can go back to different points in time and go, this was a weakness, I found the strength, now I can implement and be better. So I think, it just came up, but it's a perfect example of anti-fragility being applied in that context. Was he lost everything at that point and he was able to rebuild better in 1 year than he did in 5 years.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, it's impressive, honestly.
It is, yeah, very impressive.
It really does show you how like those events and situations can really just lead to, I think, like as Nassim says, like post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
And I think as well, if he stuck with where he was at that time, he wouldn't obviously experience what he has now. But I feel like sometimes we're so attached to like the thing that we built, it's hard to let go. And I think it's called like cost fallacy or something. Where
sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, where you've invested so much time and money, it's like, I might as well just stick with it until like something catastrophic comes, and now you have to start new. But the thing is, it might be an L, right? But it's still a lesson.
Yeah.
So it's like
it might be an L, but it might be a lesson.
But it's a lesson. It's a lesson. At the end of the day,
that's a really good way to put it.
It's L, but it's a lesson. So it's like it's wisdom that you've gained that you can apply, and now all these like conditions where you have to maintain something is gone. So now you can start fresh and start something new with like, I would say, several years of experiences that you wouldn't have got. Yeah,
100%. I think it kind of exposes why you need to go through tough times. Like you have to go through those bad times where you've lost everything. I wouldn't hope it on anyone. And I think I'm quite ignorant to say that out loud, because people have lost everything at some point, right? And I think I haven't experienced it, but I think what you learn along the way and the person you've become, if you've lost everything, are you willing to sort of build it back? And I think there's been examples all over the world that people have been able to build back. They've been able to build back stronger and better. And so I'm using that as a reference point, that once you've lost everything, it's not everything's been lost at that point. It's an opportunity to regrow and regrow better. Obviously, again, I'm speaking out of context. I haven't experienced that. So I'm not going to sit here and say, you've lost your house, your family, go build back better. I think that's quite insensitive to say. But in saying that, like, everyone in life will lose something. And it's about, how do you come back from that?